So based on your conversation with the president yesterday, do you think that he is still going to stay in NATO since you know him so well? And second of all, do you still consider him daddy after yesterday?
Well, on the daddy thing, this is a language problem. What happens is the following. I have to explain to you, because it follows me a little bit. I can assure you. Now, we had a sort of pre-summit meeting, the president and I, in June in The Hague. And he had been very angry that day with Iran and with Israel. This was in June last year. And in Dutch, you would say, hey, the translation of your father is daddy, and I said, hey, yeah, sometimes daddy has to be angry. So I was not calling him my daddy, but saying, but of course, daddy has also a special connotation, and I now have to live with this the rest of my life. And I own it, and the president owns it, because he brought out T-shirts, he made a movie, Daddy is Home, and he returned to the United States. This was so funny. And this is why I like him so much. But, hey, yeah, you make mistakes. And this is when you are not a native speaker. Sorry for that. No, again, as I said, the conversation was really open. It was really between friends, but there is really also clearly his disappointment.
Your remarks have given us a lot to talk about, and in particular, you've already addressed, as we say in the U.S., the elephant in the room, about the knot in the stomach, about the future of the transatlantic relationship and the NATO alliance. Understanding, of course, that with your visit to the White House yesterday, your meetings with President Trump, Secretary Rubio, Secretary Hegseth, of course, in many ways, diplomatic conversations must remain private in a certain extent in order to work. But what can you share with us from those conversations as we think about the future of the alliance?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as they would say in diplomatic circles, these conversations were frank and open. Which is good.
Candid. I mean, they may have been candid.
They even
were
candid, frank and open. But that's good, because we are amongst friends here. I mean, the president, myself, we like each other. We are good friends for many years now. And I'd rather have the conversation on the table instead of tiptoeing around it. I sensed his disappointment about the fact that he felt that too many allies were not with him. And I explained to him yesterday, I said, hey, Mr. President, clearly the overwhelming majority of Europeans have done what the US asked of him and what was previously agreed in these circumstances. And yes, sometimes it takes a bit of time. But hey, guess what? We have coalitions in Europe. We have sometimes the political home front to take care of. So sometimes it takes a couple of days. But then we pulled together, and almost the whole of Europe did, for the US to project power on the world stage through its partners in Europe. And NATO is there, of course, to protect the Europeans, but also to protect the United States. As Jonas Sture, the Norwegian Prime Minister, said, these huge nuclear submarines in Russia are not there to attack Norway. They are there to attack the United States. And it is thanks to the alliance that we are able to make sure that they are not able to get in a position to do that. So, and this is just an example where both the US mainland and Europe stay stronger and safe because of the alliance. So it was a good conversation. It was open and candid. And I clearly felt his disappointment, which, again, to a certain extent, I understand.
The president certainly made his disappointment clear. He's invoked renewed calls for the U.S. to potentially withdraw from NATO. Important to remember, though, that the challenge of America's participation in NATO itself is not necessarily something new. I'm always reminded of your earliest predecessor, the very first Secretary General of NATO, who said that the challenge of the alliance, maybe the purpose of NATO, is keeping the Russians out and the Americans in. What case did you make to the president about keeping the Americans in, and what case would you make to the American people about why NATO matters? What's the value proposition to the Americans?
Well, let's start with sometimes the wrong value proposition. The wrong view on this, I feel, I mean, I'm an audience of one, but let's have that debate, is that NATO was founded because the United States didn't want to repeat a mistake after the Second World War of isolationism, which was the case after the First World War. At a famous speech by Churchill, late December in the US Congress, where he said, again, for the second time in the 20th century, the long arm of history reaches out to the new world to come to the defense of the old. And let's not repeat that mistake. That was one reason to create NATO. But the main reason to create NATO is there because there is a case to be built for the Europeans, for the transatlantic community as a whole, including the United States and Canada, to stay safe. And for the United States to stay safe, you need a secure Europe, yes, but you also need a secure Arctic. You need a secure Atlantic, because otherwise the Russians and others might pose a threat. And we know by now, hey, let's not be naive about this, that you cannot separate what happens in the Indo-Pacific from what happens in the Atlantic. It is China and North Korea and the Russians working together with Iran when it comes, for example, to the war effort, unprovoked war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine. They work together. This is worldwide, and we have to work together. I'm not pleading for NATO to expand to the Indo-Pacific, but the fact that we have that close cooperation now with Japan, with Korea, South Korea, with obviously Australia and New Zealand, I think is evidence of that. So for all these reasons, if my family lives in the United States, and they are partly Americans anyway by birth, and others have moved here after the Second World War, they deeply sense that for the US to stay safe, we have to stick together, and we need this transatlantic partnership.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to Mirror Now.